and over 13,000 have died. Elizabeth Palmer is in London tonight tracking the crisis across Europe.
Exhausted and overstretched, doctors and nurses are working round the clock in northern Italy. But still, this outbreak is currently the worst in the world. Italians may be under lockdown. Big cities like Rome have never looked so empty. And yet, there were more than 600 new deaths just overnight. It was a military convoy that transported coffins to the cemetery outside the town of Bergamo. Spain is bracing for its own outbreak, the second worst in Europe, to escalate. Authorities in Madrid have ordered a conference center to be transformed into an emergency hospital. In British pubs, last call was Friday night. They're now closed, and so are restaurants. The number of deaths in the UK remains relatively low, 281 overall, but it is steadily rising. And today the government announced that 1.5 million, especially vulnerable people, will be asked to stay at home for 3 months. For those still out and about in the spring weather, Prime Minister Boris Johnson advised, don't get too close.
Don't think that fresh air in itself automatically provides some immunity. You have to stay 2 meters apart.
But that kind of distancing is simply not possible in much of the developing world. And epidemiologists warn that more than 1 billion Africans and Indians will be facing the crisis next. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, London.
Nipah, Hendra, Ebola, Marburg, SARS. These are some of the world's scariest viruses. Hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola are extremely fatal. They kill up to 90% of people infected, while SARS, a coronavirus, has a lower mortality rate but spreads incredibly rapidly. All of these nasty pathogens have surfaced in humans in just the last 50 years, and they are all carried by bats. Which, to be clear, really isn't bats' fault. The recent rise in outbreaks is likely due to humans and our animals creeping ever farther into bats' territory, especially in the tropics. In Malaysia, for example, the spread of commercial pig farms into bat-inhabited forests led to the first human outbreak via pigs of Nipah. And in Australia, human Hendra cases are cropping up as destruction of native forests forces fruit bats to feed in suburban gardens. But still, bats do appear to carry more human-killing diseases than pretty much any other animal. One big reason is that, with a few notable exceptions, bats love company. Different kinds of bats often roost together in huge numbers in close quarters, which helps viruses spread, not just between individuals, but also between species. What's more, most infected bats don't die. They live pretty normal bat lives, flapping around and giving the viruses time to spread. In fact, flight may be the reason bats are so resilient to infection. As a rule, mammals can't produce the immense amounts of energy needed for flight without also producing a lot of reactive waste products that damage our DNA. So when our bat cousins took to the air, they leveled up their in-flight DNA damage repair kits and other defenses, including specialized cells that keep viral invaders in check. So bats can survive the deadly viruses. But what may matter even more, for humans anyway, is how the viruses survive the bats. Nasty as they are, most viruses are also extremely finicky. In order to thrive, they require the perfectly controlled climate inside a normal resting on the ground mammal. But when bats take to the air, their internal temperatures cruise to around 40 degrees Celsius. Those frequent in-flight saunas are far too toasty for your average virus, but a few hardy viruses have evolved to tolerate the heat, which incidentally means they can definitely weather a meager human fever. Essentially, flight may have helped bats gain virtual immunity to viruses and train viruses to be virtually immune to us. Stupid flying. So, what should we landlubbers do? We need bats for insect control and pollination and a whole bunch of other things. Maybe we could even learn some immune tricks from them, like how to be really good at not getting cancer. Plus, bats aren't the biggest carriers of human disease. Humans are. Just do the math. Perhaps we'd be better off leaving bats alone and trying to control the spread of diseases carried by a different kind of flying mammal.
Have died. Elizabeth Palmer's in London tonight, tracking the crisis across Europe.
Exhausted and overstretched, doctors and nurses are working round the clock in northern Italy, but still this outbreak is currently the worst in the world. Italians may be under lockdown. Big cities like Rome have never looked so empty. And yet, there were more than 600 new deaths just overnight. It was a military convoy that transported coffins to the cemetery outside the town of Bergamo. Spain is bracing for its own outbreak, the second worst in Europe, to escalate. Authorities in Madrid have ordered a conference center to be transformed into an emergency hospital. In British pubs, last call was Friday night. They're now closed, and so are restaurants. The number of deaths in the UK remains relatively low, 281 overall, but it is steadily rising. And today the government announced that 1.5 million, especially vulnerable people, will be asked to stay at home for 3 months. For those still out and about in the spring weather, Prime Minister Boris Johnson advised, don't get too close.
Don't think that fresh air in itself automatically provides some immunity. You have to stay 2 meters apart.
But that kind of distancing is simply not possible in much of the developing world. And epidemiologists warn that more than 1 billion Africans and Indians will be facing the crisis next. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, London.
Don't forget to keep washing your hands. Nothing is more effective in helping prevent the virus spread. But beware of the viral claims that keep appearing online. Myth number 1, holding your breath. If you can hold your breath for more than 10 seconds without discomfort, one widely shared claim asserts there is no fibrosis or scarring in the lungs and basically no infection. Nope. Holding your breath is not a test for fibrosis, and fibrosis is not a symptom of COVID-19. The main symptoms, don't forget, are high fever and a persistent dry cough. Myth number 2, homemade hand sanitizer recipes. Beware internet solutions for homemade sanitizer. Anything based on disinfectants for cleaning surfaces probably won't be suitable for use on the skin. As for suggestions that vodka could work, unfortunately, it doesn't contain enough alcohol to be effective. Myth number 3, the virus can survive on surfaces for up to a month. This is highly unlikely. Take research on other strains of coronavirus like SARS or MERS. It shows that viruses can remain infectious on hard surfaces like metal, glass or plastic from about 2 hours up to a maximum of 9 days. But the UK government says the risk of contamination is likely to be reduced significantly after 72 hours. Myth number 4, cow urine. Some Hindu groups in India believe cow urine has medicinal properties and can ward off coronavirus and other diseases. Not so, say the experts. Cow urine doesn't cure things like cancer, and there's no evidence at all that it can prevent COVID-19. You're better off simply washing your hands.
In December 2019, the Chinese authorities notified the world that a virus was spreading through their communities. In the following months, it spread to other countries, with cases doubling within days. This virus is the severe acute respiratory syndrome-related coronavirus 2 that causes the disease called COVID-19 and that everyone simply calls coronavirus. What actually happens when it infects a human, and what should we all do? A virus is really just a hull around genetic material and a few proteins, arguably not even a living thing. It can only make more of itself by entering a living cell. Corona may spread via surfaces, but it's still uncertain how long it can survive on them. Its main way of spreading seems to be droplet infection, when people cough, or if you touch someone who's ill and then your face, say rubbing your eyes or nose. The virus starts its journey here and then hitches a ride as a stowaway deeper into the body. Its destinations are the intestines, the spleen or the lungs, where it can have the most dramatic effect. Even just a few coronaviruses can cause quite a dramatic situation. The lungs are lined with billions of epithelial cells. These are the border cells of your body, lining your organs and mucosa, waiting to be infected. Corona connects to a specific receptor on its victim's membranes to inject its genetic material. The cell, ignorant of what's happening, executes the new instructions, which are pretty simple: copy and reassemble. It fills up with more and more copies of the original virus until it reaches a critical point and receives one final order: self-destruct. The cell sort of melts away, releasing new corona particles, ready to attack more cells. The number of infected cells grows exponentially. After about 10 days, millions of body cells are infected and billions of viruses swarm the lungs. The virus has not caused too much damage yet, but corona is now going to release a real beast on you, your own immune system. The immune system, while there to protect you, can actually be pretty dangerous to yourself and needs tight regulation. And as immune cells pour into the lungs to fight the virus, corona infects some of them and creates confusion. Cells have neither ears nor eyes. They communicate mostly via tiny information proteins called cytokines. Nearly every important immune reaction is controlled by them. Corona causes infected immune cells to overreact and yell bloody murder. In a sense, it puts the immune system into a fighting frenzy and sends way more soldiers than it should, wasting its resources and causing damage. Two kinds of cells in particular wreak havoc. First, neutrophils, which are great at killing stuff, including ourselves. As they arrive in their thousands, they start pumping out enzymes that destroy as many friends as enemies. The other important type of cells that go into a frenzy are killer T cells, which usually order infected cells to commit controlled suicide. Confused as they are, they start ordering healthy cells to kill themselves too. The more and more immune cells arrive, the more damage they do, and the more healthy lung tissue they kill. This might get so bad that it can cause permanent, irreversible damage that leads to lifelong disabilities. In most cases, the immune system slowly regains control. It kills the infected cells, intercepts the viruses trying to infect new ones, and cleans up the battlefield. Recovery begins. The majority of people infected by corona will get through it with relatively mild symptoms. But many cases become severe or even critical. We don't know the percentage because not all cases have been identified, but it's safe to say that there is a lot more than with the flu. In more severe cases, millions of epithelial cells have died, and with them, the lung's protective lining is gone. That means that the alveoli, tiny air sacs via which breathing occurs, can be infected by bacteria that aren't usually a big problem. Patients get pneumonia, respiration becomes hard or even fails, and patients need ventilators to survive. The immune system has fought at full capacity for weeks and made millions of antiviral weapons. And as thousands of bacteria rapidly multiply, it is overwhelmed. They enter the blood and overrun the body. If this happens, death is very likely. The coronavirus is often compared to the flu, but actually, it's much more dangerous. While the exact death rate is hard to pin down during an ongoing pandemic, we know for sure that it's much more contagious and spreads faster than the flu. There are two futures for a pandemic like corona: fast and slow. Which future we will see depends on how we all react to it in the early days of the outbreak. A fast pandemic will be horrible and cost many lives. A slow pandemic will not be remembered by the history books. The worst-case scenario for a fast pandemic begins with a very rapid rate of infection because there are no countermeasures in place to slow it down. Why is this so bad? In a fast pandemic, many people get sick at the same time. If the numbers get too large, healthcare systems become unable to handle it. There aren't enough resources like medical staff or equipment like ventilators left to help everybody. People will die untreated. And as more healthcare workers get sick themselves, the capacity of healthcare systems falls even further. If this becomes the case, then horrible decisions will have to be made about who gets to live and who doesn't. The number of deaths rises significantly in such a scenario. To avoid this, the world, that means all of us, needs to do what it can to turn this into a slow pandemic. A pandemic is slowed down by the right responses, especially in the early phase, so that everyone who gets sick can get treatment and there's no crunch point with overwhelmed hospitals. Since we don't have a vaccine for corona, we have to socially engineer our behavior to act like a social vaccine. This simply means two things: not getting infected and not infecting others. Although it sounds trivial, the very best thing you can do is to wash your hands. Soap is actually a powerful tool. The coronavirus is encased in what is basically a layer of fat. Soap breaks that fat apart and leaves it unable to infect you. It also makes your hands slippery, and with the mechanical motions of washing, viruses are ripped away. To do it properly, wash your hands as if you've just cut up some jalapenos and want to put in your contacts next. The next thing is social distancing, which is not a nice experience, but a nice thing to do. This means no hugging, no handshakes. If you can stay at home to protect those who need to be out for society to function. From doctors to cashiers or police officers. You depend on all of them. They all depend on you to not get sick. On a larger level, there are quarantines, which can mean different things, from travel restrictions or actual orders to stay at home. Quarantines are not great to experience and certainly not popular. But they buy us, and especially the researchers working on medication and vaccination, crucial time. So if you are put under quarantine, you should understand why and respect it. None of this is fun, but looking at the big picture, it is a really small price to pay. The question of how pandemics end depends on how they start. If they start fast with a steep slope, they end badly. If they start slow with a not so steep slope, they end okayish. And in this day and age, it really is in all of our hands. Literally and figuratively. A huge thanks to the experts who helped us on short notice with this video, especially Our World in Data, the online publication for research and data on the world's largest problems and how to make progress solving them. Check out their site. It also includes a constantly updated page on the corona pandemic.
It is very likely that this virus has come from bats.
Bats have lots of viruses. Very few of these viruses actually make them sick.
Bats are not a villain. Coronaviruses are a type of virus that can spread from animals to humans and cause diseases like SARS and MERS. The latest coronavirus outbreak started in Wuhan, China. So far, it's killed almost 1,400 people and infected more than 60,000 around the world. Scientists are racing to figure out how humans contracted the new virus. Based on initial genetic testing and past outbreaks, they say it's likely the coronavirus originated in bats.
There was a recent paper put out where they looked at the sequence of a virus that
They found that the closest relative to the Wuhan virus was a virus from that. 96% similar. I think that is pretty accepted, that the viruses are very likely coming from bats, but how they're getting to us from bats, either directly or through some intermediate host, needs to be worked out for this new one. There isn't one particular kind or species of bats that's associated with spillovers. For Nipah and Andra, it's the big fruit bats. For SARS and MERS and this one, it's smaller insect-eating bats.
Other animals have passed viruses between bats and humans before.
SARS really spread from civet cats into humans. But now we know that the virus some point in time jumped from bats into civet cats.
with MERS, what we think happened there is that a coronavirus jumped from bats into dromedary camels. And recently we're seeing this virus jumping from dromedary camels into the human population.
Now, Chinese scientists say pangolins could be the middlemen, but their research hasn't been made public yet.
Pangolins are the most trafficked animal in the world. They're basically like an armadillo with plates. So they've got these really long scales, and those scales are prized in traditional Chinese medicine. I think the isolation of this virus from pangolins is going to cause a lot of stir, because there's going to be kind of a knee-jerk reaction to say, pangolins are probably it. The more that people look at some of the genetic data, you'll get a little bit of infighting in the scientific community as to really whether or not the pangolin virus is the true direct link, or if it's just maybe another piece of the puzzle.
I think we should be really cautious until we see the paper that comes out.
Scientists don't need to know where the virus came from in order to develop a vaccine. But identifying the origin can help contain the current outbreak and prevent future ones.
After the SARS outbreak, the government banned the sale of civet cats because we had now determined that civet cats could lead to more coronavirus exposures. So something similar could happen if With 100% confidence, we can identify that it was this animal.
Early reports linked the first coronavirus patients to a market in Wuhan where bats might have been sold as food. New testing has raised doubts about the market's role in the outbreak, but xenophobia toward eating bats has still festered.
If you cook meat, you're going to destroy viruses like coronavirus because it's not very heat stable. But either handling the animals or handling the meat or preparing the meat would certainly put you at rest.
Chickens give us salmonella all the time. Do we stop eating chickens? No. Just stigmatizing a traditional practice or someone's food doesn't help the cause. It's wrong. You got to understand the science and explain it to them.
Scientists do know that bats and rodents carry a relatively high number of viruses, but bats often don't get sick from them.
If we can figure out why bats don't get sick, we may be able to apply it to reducing the effects of viral infection. We don't have clear-cut answers. We've got a lot of hypotheses. One is that bats are the only mammals that have evolved the ability to fly. Flying takes up an enormous output of energy. As a byproduct of all that metabolic activity, you generate toxic molecules. What bats have done is evolve to deal with that. Those properties, for whatever reason, allow them to deal with viruses as well. But all this is conjecture.
We and other groups over the years have identified molecular mechanisms that bats have evolved that suppresses inflammation in bats. So bats have a good antiviral response that helps them control virus replication, and they have low levels of inflammation.
Despite the animal's potential relationship to the new coronavirus, virologists don't want people to vilify bats, many of which are endangered.
The reputation of bats is a very high concern. Bats are so essential for our ecosystems. For example, the bats that I study, the flying foxes, are major pollinators.
We love bats. We use bats as a model to understand.
At first, you might think it's a cold, and it could be, but COVID-19 could escalate. Here's what you need to know. According to the World Health Organization China Joint Mission on COVID-19, as of February 20th, 80% of laboratory-confirmed cases were mild to moderate, 14% were severe, and 6% were critical. Just to be clear, a mild case of COVID-19 is not like a mild cold. The symptoms will still be pretty severe. Anything less than needing oxygen puts you in this category. Severe cases do need supplemental oxygen, and critical ones are defined by respiratory or multi-organ failure. The symptoms, treatments, and timelines of having the disease vary depending on which category patients fall into. So let's break down what having COVID-19 looks like day to day for each level of severity. It can take as few as 2 or as many as 14 days after being exposed to the novel coronavirus for the first symptom to develop. This is when it might feel like a cold or the common flu. Many patients develop fevers early on. The World Health Organization China Joint Mission saw that about 88% of people who had COVID-19 had a fever. Another study out of China showed that while only 44% of patients had a fever on admission to a hospital, 89% eventually developed one. But there have been some cases that led with gastrointestinal symptoms. Diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, and/or abdominal discomfort may appear a couple of days before respiratory symptoms. This isn't the norm, though, because COVID-19 is a respiratory disease. That means for most patients, the virus will start and end with the lungs. In the early days of infection, the virus invades lung cells. Specifically, this can damage the cilia, the hair-like projections that move around to keep airways clear of mucus and debris. When cells get infected, they die and shed off, adding to the debris and hindering your body's ability to keep stuff out of the lungs and trachea. The inflammation causes damage, and damage causes more inflammation. And this cycle could continue until there's no healthy tissue left. And inflammation might explain why a dry cough is one of the most common symptoms. Same goes for shortness of breath and phlegm production. Other symptoms that can appear around this time are fatigue, sore throat, headache, joint or muscle pain, chills, and a runny nose. By day 5, patients with pre-existing conditions might find that they have trouble breathing, and it usually takes about 7 days for a person to go to a hospital. Mild cases, though, usually clear up by this time. but those with moderate to critical cases will have developed pneumonia, which can range from non-life-threatening to severe. Recovery time for these patients could be anywhere from a few days to weeks. For some severe and critical cases, though, symptoms can escalate into acute respiratory distress syndrome. ARDS is an illness that happens when fluid builds up in the lungs. Inflammation triggers a flood of immune cells that are meant to target the infection. They're usually isolated to infected areas, but sometimes the body goes overboard, which is when the immune cells start killing anything in their path, including healthy cells. ARDS is often fatal. In critical cases, it can lead to respiratory failure, requiring advanced life support. And this is most likely when patients head to the ICU. ARDS treatment includes supplemental oxygen and mechanical ventilation. The goal is to get more oxygen into the bloodstream, since the lungs can't. When this treatment doesn't work, the lungs are basically too flooded to get any oxygen into your bloodstream. That's the cause of most COVID-19 deaths. And even when a patient survives this phase, they could be left with permanent lung damage. SARS punched holes in some infected people's lungs, giving them a honeycomb effect. And these lesions have been seen in people affected by the novel coronavirus too. Early studies found that most people who die of the disease will do so within 14 to 19 days. And on average, people who recover are released from the hospital after 2.5 weeks. But with the most critical cases, recovery could take months. Once a patient is in the recovery period, it's possible that they could still be contagious. These people should work with their doctors and public health officials to determine when they're no longer a risk. As of now, there is no vaccine for the virus. So the best way to avoid getting sick is to avoid being exposed. COVID-19 spreads easily from person to person through coughing and sneezing. So wash your hands often and avoid close contact with people who are sick. And clean and disinfect surfaces that you use daily. COVID-19 should be taken seriously, but most cases are survivable. So stay home, stay clean, and don't panic.
coronavirus has got all of us scared. We are taking all kinds of precautions, be it sanitizing our hands or staying home for work. While many of us are choosing to isolate ourselves, there are some recipes which you can try at home to boost your immune system. Today I'm gonna teach you a recipe which is very beneficial for your body in a lot of ways and help you to stay fit during this time. Let's start. Add some water into saucepan and grate some ginger on it. Add some peppercorns. And a little bit of cinnamon. Let it boil for some time. Add some green tea in it. And leave it for 5 minutes. Now strain it into cup. Add some lemon. And honey according to your taste. So our drink is ready and it's a very good immunity booster. As you can see, this was the simple recipe which you can easily make at home. If you are working from home, take a break, and even if you are not working from home, then also you need to try this recipe. This recipe is not only very simple but very healthy and beneficial for your system. Stay fit and
Stated Clearly is funded by our viewers on patreon.com/Stated Clearly. Stated Clearly presents Where do new viruses come from? If you've been watching the news, you've probably heard of the novel or new coronavirus, which, starting in late 2019, began making people ill in China. International air travel has since allowed it to spread person to person to new countries. As governments began to issue travel restrictions and even quarantines, speculations about the origin of the virus began to spread online. Some claim that the virus might be a genetically modified weapon, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
This claim currently seems highly unlikely. Others suggest that the virus may be an escaped lab specimen. Now, this actually is possible. Viruses have escaped from research labs in the past, but as of the time that I'm recording this voiceover, investigations into this idea have not yet reached any solid conclusions. Could there be another, more natural explanation for the origin of this virus? The answer is yes. COVID-19, the new human-infecting coronavirus, may have simply evolved from an older animal-infecting coronavirus. To understand how this may have happened, let's first take a look at viruses in general. What are viruses? Of the many things that can make you sick by infecting and reproducing inside you, viruses are among the smallest. If we resize this drawing to a more realistic scale, you see that hundreds of viruses can fit inside a single bacterial cell. That's how tiny they are. Thousands of different viral species have been studied and described by scientists so far. Millions more likely exist. They come in many forms, but all species consist of a small collection of genes, stretches of either DNA or RNA that carry information for making more copies of the virus, and those genes are enclosed in a protective coating of protein and sometimes a lipid membrane. All known viruses are parasitic, but most are not parasitic to humans. Instead, some only target plant cells, others only infect bacteria, and so on. A virus reproduces by getting its genes into a living cell. Different viruses do this in different ways, but once inside, the cell acts as if the viral genes are its own genes. It begins reading them and building copies of the virus instead of performing its normal tasks. Coronaviruses are a huge family of virus species that infect animal cells. Some infect chickens, others infect pigs, some infect humans, but most of them are extremely mild. They simply give you the common cold. Corona means crown and refers to the unusually large crown-like spikes sticking out of their membranes. These protein spikes are selectively sticky, sort of like Velcro. They don't attach to most objects, but are extremely sticky when they bump into specific molecules
found on the outsides of animal cells. Once held firmly in place, the coronavirus waits until swallowed by the cell. It then begins to reproduce at the cell's expense. Different animal species have different types of molecules on the outsides of their cells. Because of this, bird-infecting coronaviruses usually can't infect humans. Their Velcro doesn't hold strong enough to our cells. Unfortunately, the natural process of evolution can sometimes help a virus overcome this problem. When virus genes are being copied during reproduction, mutations can occur. These are either due to simple copying errors or processes called reassortment and recombination. These happen when two or more viruses infect a single cell. In most cases, mutations that change the shape of viral spikes render the virus useless. Their Velcro no longer sticks to any host cells. On rare occasions, however, a chance mutation will just happen to allow a virus to attach to a new host species. If the modified virus is then lucky enough to encounter that new host species, infection can occur. We call this a spillover infection. The virus has spilled over into a new type of host. Early on, during a spillover event, the virus usually isn't very good at infecting its new host. Its Velcro is not a perfect match, and many other challenges might slow the virus down. Oftentimes, the mutations that let it infect the new host also make it worse at infecting its original host. Because of this, many spillover viruses go extinct after infecting just one or two people. They're usually dead ends. That said, if the virus can survive and reproduce just long enough, natural selection will promote any new mutations that help it better spread and reproduce in the new host population. Positive mutations accumulate over multiple generations. Negative mutations are discarded until, bam! A new epidemic is being screamed about on the news. Though it may seem to us that these new viruses just sort of pop into existence overnight, scientists now know there was a long, slow burn before each explosion. Genetic evidence tells us that slowly evolving spillovers have been the cause of almost every major outbreak known in history. In the early 2000s, a coronavirus that used to only infect bats appears to have spilled over into civets. There, it mutated even further and spilled over into humans. We called it the SARS virus because it causes severe acute respiratory syndrome. It spread internationally from person to person, and several scientists were infected in the lab. By the time the virus was contained, over 8,000 people had been infected, over 700 died. A coronavirus from camels also recently spilled over to humans, causing even more deaths. Coronaviruses are not the only types of animal viruses that can adapt to new hosts. HIV spilled over from chimps, most likely when someone cut themselves while preparing chimp meat for dinner. The swine flu came partly from pigs, but we think it actually evolved through a recombination with a pig virus and a bird virus. The 1918 Spanish flu, the big one that devastated populations all around the world, may have spilled over from chickens. While the evidence is not yet conclusive, the new coronavirus might just be one more example of normal evolution. A very similar virus has been found in bats, and another was recently discovered in pangolins. These animals are endangered, they're protected, but they're often used illegally for food, rituals, and alternative medicine in the region where COVID-19 first broke out. Now, there are serious people checking to make sure that the virus did not come from a lab, either by accident or on purpose. After all, the technology to genetically modify viruses really does exist. But it's important to understand that the normal process of descent with modification, acted upon by natural selection, really does produce new viruses. It happens naturally. The chance of a virus evolving to successfully infect a new species is extremely low, but there are over 7.5 billion people on this planet. Most of us interact with animals on a daily basis. We keep them as pets. We eat them as food. This means that as unlikely as spillover infections might be, there are billions of opportunities for one to take hold every single day. Add this to the fact that the entire world is now connected through international flights, and you realize that what happens in Vegas doesn't actually stay in Vegas. At least, not the way that it used to. Luckily, we have international groups like the World Health Organization and various centers for disease control to help contain outbreaks when they happen. With international cooperation, we have prevented many catastrophes in the past, and we will prevent many more in the future, so long as our species continues to work together. So, in summary, where do new viruses come from? In most cases, new viruses evolve from old viruses. Stopping the spread of new viruses requires international cooperation. For up-to-date, accurate information on the risks, visit the World Health Organization website at who.int. I am John Perry, and that is the novel coronavirus stated clearly. This episode of Stated Clearly was funded by our viewers on patreon.com/Stated Clearly. If you found this video helpful, please do consider contributing there as well. Aside from helping me out, you will also get secret access to a Stated Clearly animation that is no longer public. It's actually the first one that I ever made, and, well, you'll see. To learn more about evolution and to find free tools for use in the classroom, if you happen to be a teacher, high school, middle school, college, visit our website at statedclearly.com. So long for now. Stay curious.
You know that the best way to prevent the spread of coronavirus is to wash your hands.
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands! But why? It's because soap, regular soap, fancy honeysuckle soap, artisan peppermint soap, just any soap, absolutely annihilates viruses like the coronavirus. Here's how. This is what a virus like coronavirus looks like. It's a bit of material surrounded by a coating of proteins and fat. Viruses easily stick to places like your hands, but when you rinse your hands with just water, it rushes right over the virus. That's because that layer of fat makes the virus behave kind of like a drop of oil. You can see it happening in this demonstration. Oils are just liquid fats. What happens when you pour oil into water? It floats. It doesn't mix. But add soap. And suddenly that fatty oil dissolves into the water. That's because inside, soap has two-sided molecules. One end of the molecule is attracted to water, the other end to fat. So when the soap molecules come in contact with water and fat, these dual attractions literally pull the fat apart, surrounding the oil particles and dispersing them through the water. Let's go back to our coronavirus molecule with that layer of fat holding everything together. When it interacts with soap, bam! That fat gets pulled out by the soap. Soap literally pulls apart and demolishes these viruses. And then the water rinses the harmless leftover shards of virus down the drain. But, and you know where I'm going with this, it takes time for this effect to happen. 20 seconds to be specific. To show why, we ordered this lotion that mimics viruses and their fatty layers. It glows under a UV light. If you just rinse your hands under regular water, nothing comes off. If you wash with soap for just 5 seconds or 10 seconds, your hands are still covered. The virus is still there, able to get you and others sick. But 20 full seconds, now the soap is actually destroying the virus. Hand sanitizer works too because it's mostly alcohol, and alcohol works in a somewhat similar way to soap, breaking down that fatty layer. You need a high concentration of alcohol to make that work. The CDC recommends hand sanitizers with at least 60% alcohol. But even with 60% alcohol, the CDC recommends using soap if you can. If your hands are sweaty or dirty when you use the sanitizer, that can dilute it and diminish its effectiveness. As for soap, just any old soap works. You don't need soap marketed as antibacterial even. The FDA says skip it. There's no proof it's any more effective. Just be sure to wash your hands for 20 seconds. That's happy birthday twice. Happy birthday, dear. I guess me. Or the chorus to Lizzo's Truth Hurts. Straight to my face.
Or Prince,
Raspberry beret.
or Eminem,
Go, go, only got
or even Dolly.
Jolene, Jolene, Jolene.
Just as long as it's 20 seconds. And you're using the ultimate virus annihilator. Soap.
Connery, thanks very much for joining us. Now, you actually got the disease early on. You recovered from it. Just talk us through the different stages and what they felt like.
Yeah, so this particular virus, it happens in different stages, as you said. You get better before you get worse. So in my case, the first stage was I had the cold. Just a common cold. My nose was stuffy. I had ear problems, sinus problems, that sort of thing. But then you get better before you get worse. So I was getting better, and that's when I got hit with the flu. Now, I've had the flu half a dozen times, and this was probably the worst I've felt with that. It really was quite bad. It wasn't life-threatening, but I did feel terrible. With the flu, I was stuck in bed. I had a headache. I just generally feeling unwell. I was getting better from the flu, and that's when I got hit with pneumonia. Now, the pneumonia, I've never had that before, so that was quite serious for me. And that's the point I went to hospital.
And when you had the pneumonia, just describe to us, and we've all heard the word, but none of us, or most of us, don't know what it feels like. What did that feel like to you?
Yeah, so pneumonia, it feels like you've only got 20% of your lungs working. You can't take a full breath like you need to. If you stand up and go and walk into the kitchen, you're out of breath because you just can't get that breath. It also sounds like you're breathing through a bag. Your breath is very crackly and croaky. It generally is not a fun thing at all. and it can be very, very serious.
And you're young and you look healthy, so that must have been a really scary thing.
Yeah, during that time it was, just because I don't really drink, I don't smoke, and having that problem was very scary, just because breathing's vital to life. If you can't breathe, you can't live. And so having that being affected was quite a serious thing.
How long have you now been living in this apartment, in this room that we can all see, in isolation?
I've been here for 40 days now, over 40 days. It's been a long 40 days, to be honest.
And how does that feel, 40 days? Because you're on your own, right? You have a cat, but you're on your own. You're not living with other people.
Yeah, well, with the technology age now, I can message somebody straight away, all over the world. So it's not very lonely as such. I can speak to people on Facebook, on my phone. No problem with that. But the actual interpersonal interaction that I'm lacking, that definitely is taking a toll.
So do you miss the face-to-face contact with other people?
I do, yes, and many other people are in the same boat as well, because you go down the streets, and normally this city is very vibrant, and there's a sense of life. You go on the streets at night, there's people dancing, people singing, people with families. And at the moment, there's just nothing like that. Anybody that you do see, they have a mask on, they're going to do something and they go straight home. There's no lingering, there's no groups of people chatting. It's quite sad, really.
What about your mental health and the mental health of, the people that you're communicating with in Wuhan?
Mental health wise, we're all in the same boat. There's nothing we can do about it, so there's no point us being down or being unhappy. It's just, it is what it is. It will be gone soon. We'll get over it.
Do you imagine people in Britain living the same way that you're living at the moment because they have to, because of the rate of infection?
No, I don't. I think that lifestyle is very different here in China. There's no Western influence. It is completely foreign to what we would be used to. I believe that a lockdown of a week or maximum 2 weeks in the UK would be fine, but then people would be wanting to get out. People would be wanting breaking the curfew. And there's no way that the government could really stop them doing that.
So, considering what you've had to go through, do you think that eventually you will feel safer in China when it comes to the virus than if you were living in the UK?
I believe yes and no. The city that I'm in, it's very densely populated. You've got thousands of people in the same area. So I believe that the spread happened here so fast because of that. But back in the UK, I believe that the government will have a handle on it and will be able to deal with it in the manner that they should.
So you don't think that levels of isolation that we're seeing in China at the moment that you've been experiencing yourself will be necessary in the UK?
I believe that if the infection rates were to skyrocket, then those measures will have to be implemented, and it will be a case of people will have to go through some discomfort just to help everybody else.
Finally, Connor, if we get to the same level of isolation that you're experiencing at the moment, what advice would you have?
Yeah. My advice would be to have a lot of things that will keep you entertained. Take up a hobby, learn a language. I would also advise that people don't panic. Panic doesn't help anybody. If there is an isolation crisis where everybody has to be isolated, they shouldn't think about themselves, but think about other people. If you are infected, don't go out, don't infect other people, stay at home, not because it's uncomfortable, but to protect the people around you.
Have you done anything in the last month that you've always wanted to do but haven't found the time to do? Have you learned a language? Have you read a book that you haven't read before? Tell us.
Yeah,
I've read a fair few books. I have a Kindle, which is really handy. I've painted. I've never been good at painting, but I'm slowly learning. I'm learning Russian at the moment, just in my free time. My days are busy. Even though I am isolated, it's definitely important to keep busy. So every morning for half an hour I do sit-ups and push-ups, just to keep myself from going mental. I'm learning how to cook properly. I've never really cooked decent meals. Just anything that you can think of. And make sure that whatever you're doing, you're interested in it and you want to do it.
Sounds like you're the model citizen in the age of the virus.
I wouldn't say that. There are many more people in this city that are doing the right thing and adhering to the rules.
Connery, thank you very much for talking to us. Good luck.
Not a problem. Thank you.
For up to a month. This is highly unlikely. Take research on other strains of coronavirus like SARS or MERS. It shows that viruses can remain infectious on hard surfaces